One of the things that I think is most important for people to understand is that writing a book is about art and publishing a book is about business. And so when you're trying to figure out whether you want to get published or not, you have to figure out how much you want to push your art into the business, and you have to really learn the business. I'm Ann Garvin, and I teach in the low residency MFA for Drexel University, and I write books that are funny and sad, and my last one was I Like You Just Fine When You're Not Around, and that was a USA Today bestseller. I've written The Dog Here and On Maggie's Watch, and I have another book coming out in April 2021. We're really going to be talking about traditional publishing here, and so the first bit of it is trying to understand the publishing world and the market. That would be really the first step. So the best way to figure out where your book fits in the market is by reading the kinds of books that you are writing and figuring out what kinds of books are like your books and if your books fit on the shelf next to those books. A lot of authors like to think that their book is so new and different than any other book, but that's not really the best approach because you are taking your art and putting it into a business. And that's where the difference becomes. You have to figure out how you're going to fit in the publishing market, and that is putting your book on a bookshelf. Make sure you've done your research about what's appropriate for publishing these days. For example, one of the things that we know is that very, very long books, over 300 to 500 pages, usually don't get published. So we're working for 80,000 words maybe, and sometimes that is determined by what kind of book you're writing, like young adult or thriller or steampunk or contemporary fiction. And all of that information can be found online, and all of that information can be found by you being a reader. You really need to write the whole book and have it ready in the absolute best condition you can get it into. There are authors that sell books on proposal or an outline, and those are not typically debut authors. Usually, when you first start out, you have to write the whole book, get it edited yourself, make sure it works, get some beta readers that are going to read it that are not your mother, and maybe, hopefully, people that don't love you, because you really want to get the best advice. One of the things that I always tell people is don't love your book too much, because it will be a heartbreak when you're asked to change it, and you're certainly going to be asked to change it on some level, especially if you're bringing your art to the publishing world. It's a business, and so it has to fit the business models. But always finish that manuscript first, all the way through, get it beautifully done, and then you're ready for an agent. And that's really the next step. Your job is to figure out how to persuade an agent to read your work, and you have to learn how to write a query letter that engages an agent. So you're really writing a sales letter around your book. We want you to prepare a synopsis, and we want you to figure out how best to talk about your book in the smallest, most compelling way. You know, it's not that complicated because there are some industry standards. Some of that can depend on the type of book you're writing, but most often you will greet the agent, tell them one sentence why you chose to pitch them. You say just a little bit about your manuscript, how long it is, what genre it fits. And then one of the best things you can do for them is sum it up in an easy way by saying this book is a little bit like this book and a little bit like this book, so that people understand that you've done your research, and it helps them understand what project you're working on. After that, you drop in a little paragraph, about 250 words of what your book is about. Then just below that, you add about 2-3 lines of why you're qualified or interested in writing this book. Then you say, thank you, I hope to hear from you, goodbye. You know, I wish I could be one of those authors that said that they sent out 1 or 2 query letters, but in fact, I probably sent out 75 query letters and was rejected, 74 times. It's hard, and you have to get some thick skin, and you have to be really good with rejection. So I always say that you should maybe take your medication and get a therapist during this process. The way to find the best agent for your work is a big question as well, but there are some resources online that can really help you do that. If you first go to the books that are similar to yours, you can always read the acknowledgments in the back of the book and find out who those agents are. Then you go online and you look in places like Publishers Marketplace or the Writer's Market, and you can look very specifically under the categories that represent your work the best. Take a look at those agents. There's also a fantastic online resource called Query Tracker, and that is fantastic. You can put the parameters of what you're interested in and the book you have to sell, and they will churn out certain agents that usually take that kind of book. But again, you should have a very curated list and do your research before you do any of this, because the easiest way to make someone angry in the industry is to not do your research. You want to make sure that they like you, that they are interested in your work, and you never leave a sort of sour taste in their mouth. After you have an acceptance letter from an agent, it's a good idea to spend a little time talking to that agent to make sure that you work well together. And I think often authors jump at the first agent. I certainly did. And I luckily really liked my first agent, but I think sometimes you have to sort of suss it out a little bit. The first number one thing is never pay an agent. An agent gets paid after they sell your book. So if anybody is asking money up front or even asking for editing money or anything like that, then you know that they are not probably a reputable agent. Another thing to remember is that if they don't get back to you on a timely basis, your agent this is, because your agent is working for you, or they don't answer questions in the way that you think are useful or helpful, or maybe they don't seem to be reading your work in a careful way, and so they can't really talk about you in a positive sense, then you might want to take a look at whether that person is really your perfect agent. But once you do have an agent that you like and you're working with them, your job is over for the most part. The agent's job is to reach out to editors, and the agent's job is to sell your book. So while it's very difficult to sit back and wait for your editor, for an editor to respond, that's really your job at that point, luckily.